So, first question is, how does your party plan to reform the healthcare system, specifically so that all Northeastern BC residents get equal access to care?
So I think our biggest problem with our healthcare system is that it's different with every region um, that it's offering services in.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at Fort Nelson, for example, the emergency room shutdowns that it has are primarily related to nurses. In Fort St. John, it's been doctor shortages. And we're seeing these closures all over the whole province. It's not just our area. So I think the biggest thing from a party standpoint is that we have to do an external audit of all of the health authorities.
Mm-hmm.
We need to figure out exactly what the problem is in each area and try and pinpoint on correcting those issues. That it's been a very long time since an external audit's been done that allows a non-biased, experienced expert opinion
Mm-hmm.
of what's best to go forward. Also, part of our platform, and our platform is still rolling out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's strategically it's done that way just because it could easily be copied too. But
Yeah.
at the Lido, at our latest event that we did, John Rustad was there and he was talking about our patients first.
Yeah.
And that we want to put people first. So part of that, to alleviate the system that we currently have, we're going to bring in the private healthcare system to subsidize it and to actually allow give a for example, use people that are on a wait list for an MRI. If you're waiting 8 months to be able to get on there, and there's 20 people on that list, and then there's a private clinic in Dawson that
Mm-hmm.
can get you in tomorrow. The only difference is that you'd have to pay for that in the regular scenario.
Yeah.
This would allow for people to be able to, we could essentially cut that wait list in half
Mm-hmm.
and use that private clinic to be able to alleviate our current system
Mm-hmm.
and the pressure that's being put on it. And right now, the pressure that's being put on our healthcare workers is not helping our system either. So by incorporating the private system and making it so that people don't have to actually pay, we can now take pressures off of our public system. Part of that's part of the solution. The biggest part is finding the weaknesses in our public system that have to get repaired. But right now, it seems like no matter how much money we throw at it, it's not making that much of a difference. So we have to look at alternative methods, and that's where we're looking at that European style concept where we could use private system to be able to help out. Right now, it's there; we could use it, but we're not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the other thing that we have to look at, and especially on a federal level as well, is attracting professionals to be able to come and have doctors come here, and the making it easier for the creation of professionals here to be trained. And right now we see it at local levels that they're doing everything that they can to try and promote that as well. So it's getting those extra workers is a very important thing, and it's not even just the pandemic that caused that. Even before the pandemic, we had a 30% staffing shortage in Fort St. John,
Okay.
and it's been that for quite a while. This is a system that's being neglected for quite a while, and now primarily when we started to see the baby boomers come into retirement and need that healthcare system, it was such a large generation of people that it overwhelmed it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to start planning from that perspective, and we have to plan strategically going forward the next 20 years, not just a 3 or 4 year election cycle. That
Yeah.
we have to think about it from a practical, common sense perspective.
Mm-hmm. You need a solution for now, but then also, I mean, of course, medical education takes a long time. You want these people to be well educated. You can't just wave a switch and say, okay, we have 15 new doctors. You have to educate them, especially
Yes.
if you're trying to pull them from the north.
Yeah. And the tough thing, like in Dawson, you can see at the college there that they're doing training for nurses as well, trying to retain and keep them here, and not just have them leave. We have to provide incentives to be able to keep professionals here. But our biggest thing is that we've got to bring them here, and then we've got to train as many as possible as well.
Mm-hmm. Bring them, keep them, train them, and have them want to stay rather than just come up for the incentives and then once those are done, leave again.
Correct. And I think one of the things that we've really been lacking is accountability as well.
Mhm.
So trying to get answers for why things are happening, it's been very difficult. And then also we used to have regional health authorities. So going back quite a while ago, we had regional health boards where locals would actually have input, and we'd have some sort of accountability for the people that are making decisions. Whereas right now we can't get any accountability.
Mhm.
And in any sort of public service, we should have that option.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And on a slightly kind of pivoting, and this is poignant at the moment because, of course, Canfor just announced their Fort St. John closure.
Yeah.
How will your party continue investing in natural resources while also respecting Indigenous rights and climate change?
So I think we live in a country where it's amazing the natural resources that we have, and being able to harvest them in a sustainable way. I think it can be done. We're becoming more and more efficient, but it's not just a light switch that we can flick and make it happen. And especially with the demands that we have with our current population, we have to incentivize the larger companies to improve how they're doing business. But right now, all we're doing is penalizing them and making it harder for them to do business. So when you look at the sawmill closing,
Mhm.
there's a lot of factors that go into why they're closing. But right now, the current government has made it very difficult for them to do business. They've made it very um, between the stumpage fees doubling, the carbon tax being applied, the permitting process
Yep.
taking substantially longer.
Mm.
Even between the sawmill and the OSB, it takes a lot longer. When I worked at Fiberco in Taylor, I was a millwright there,
Yeah.
and I've worked in these systems. And it's one thing when you deal with global markets and you deal with the shifts in prices and and tariffs of how it might work from from Canada to the U.S.
Yeah.
That's a natural cycle that these companies can handle. But when it comes to the point where we're driving the business out of BC and it's going to other provinces or into the U.S., we're definitely not doing something right.
Mhm.
And if we don't have somebody taking care of the forests, they're going to burn.
Mhm.
And right now, we've seen just last year alone, we saw 2 million hectares burn.
Wow.
That's billions of dollars of lost revenue.
Mhm.
If the companies leave, then who deals with the replanting?
Mhm.
Well, we have to make sure that our resources are treated properly.
Mhm.
And I believe that we need to start farming our forestry industry and treating it in a regenerative manner.
Mhm.
So when you look at other countries, they'll actually have blocks similar to what we have right now. Like in New Zealand, they've got blocks where they planted the trees, and when they go to harvest, they harvest the tree. They'll pull the stumps. They'll end up harvesting the stumps. It's done in a very efficient manner. The trees are
Mhm.
actually planted in straight lines.
Yeah.
We can start looking at better ways of doing business. And I think when it comes to environmentally, we can do better.
Mhm.
But we can't just cut off all of our resources, because as mills start to shut down, that's where the rural area of the province really starts to degrade.
Mhm.
And we rely on these industries to keep our towns alive.
Mhm.
We can't just shut them out. When First Nations is involved, I believe we need to work with our First Nations partners. But then I also think that when it comes to at the permitting level, we need to streamline of how the decisions are made, especially when it's on Crown land.
Mhm.
And our party is looking at getting rid of SOGI and trying to look at that reconciliation as more of an economic reconciliation, because it's one thing that if we're dealing with a permitting process that's struggling. If you start to add 204 levels of decision making additionally to it, it's just going to create more problems.
Mhm.
So I think that's one thing that we're willing to look at going forward to see what will work best. Because right now, our current mill is waiting a year to try and get a permit. That just isn't going to work, and we can't have a mill like that shut down. If there are 500 employees. I think I saw 220 in one article and 500.
Mm-hmm.
If there are 500 employees that are full-time and part-time, and then you've got your indirect employees that you can multiply it by 5
Mm-hmm.
at least.
Yeah.
And those are your indirect jobs and businesses as well that are relying on that. That is a huge hit to our economy.
Yeah.
And they've been here since 1963. They have, even though it's a larger corporation, they have provided a way of life for people to be able to survive here. And then they're great paying jobs. And we don't want to give those up. And it happens in every manner in the rural areas where we rely on a lot of those. And when it comes to oil and gas, when it comes to forestry, when it comes to mining, when it comes to agriculture, there's all these different ways, but we have to look at things from a practical standpoint. So then we're not just shutting towns down. We don't want to see that happen. It's catastrophic when you look at Tumbler Ridge, what happened when Quintet and Bull Moose shut down. The real estate prices went down to nothing. Luckily in Fort St. John, we're diverse for what we have.
Yeah.
But we can't see the province keep on going in this direction, because under the control of the NDP going forward for the next 4 years, we'll see this degrade much further, especially as they start to increase the carbon tax more and more. And that's one of the things that we're looking at getting rid of. And if we have to work with the federal government or fight with the federal government to keep it away until the next election coming up next year, hopefully the Conservatives get in and we see the carbon tax disappear federally as well. But we brought it in provincially, and it has to go away provincially first.
Okay.
So.
That makes sense. And similar to, you kind of touched on a little bit with Tumbler Ridge, but what will your party do to address housing affordability?
So right now, I think housing affordability, the primary driver of what's happening with that across the province is inflation. Inflation is happening by record spending across the country and across the province. Right now, federally, we're seeing debts that we've never had anywhere even close to before. Over $1 trillion that we are in debt, and just being able to service that debt is huge. So when you create new money, that creates inflation, and it causes inflation. And when that happens, it affects a lot of different things. On a provincial level, we're at a record deficit as well, and it's doing the same thing. When you add it all together, there's another thing that affects inflation, and most people don't think of it that way because it's called a tax. But the carbon tax itself is not just a tax. It really is an inflationary tool, because you can have one item, say like on my farm, I could have a tube of grease, and that tube of grease, depending on how many times it's being transported, let's say it's 5 times it's being each time they're paying a carbon tax levy on that, or a carbon tax charge on it. It's not just one tax, and on my farm, I see that in a substantial way with a lot of my different products that I end up having to use, and it creates inflated good prices. It creates inflated prices for everything in the stores, but it's also creating inflated land values as well. So right now, in order to control that, we have to control how much money we're spending and the inflation rates. But then we also, when it comes to building new houses, we have to make it cheaper as well. And that's where that inflation is causing that that cost to build a house now is just skyrocketing. And we've got to do business smarter, and that's not just spending well beyond our means, especially if we're cutting back our gross domestic product. That's if we're not going to harvest as much in forestry. 10 years ago, if our forestry was bringing in $20 billion in BC, right now we're looking at around $14 billion. So if we're not bringing in the money from that way, and it's not a revenue stream, well, then the only other way that the government gets the revenue streams that it needs is with a carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, it's us that are going to get taxed to death on that, and we can only survive so long.
Mm-hmm.
All of our goods are getting expensive, so we have to work to bring all of the costs down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that by getting rid of the carbon tax, that's one of the main drivers, and looking things from a fiscal perspective. And it's fortunately that conservatives have always been very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some areas the housing is very complex. When you look at the Lower Mainland, the density population or density and population that's there, it's always going to be a very difficult scenario, especially as in the Lower Mainland, it used to be cheaper housing as you got further out into Chilliwack,
Mm-hmm.
and people could commute. But now Chilliwack prices are even higher, so it's a difficult scenario. But normally in the rest of BC, our housing hasn't been too bad compared to that scenario.
Okay. And it's a futuristic question, but also kind of we're jumping lanes a little bit here.
Sure.
What's your stance on education in the current curriculum that we have in Northeast?
So I think when it comes to our education system, that our primary goal at a young age is to teach kids how to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily tell them what to learn. Everybody is good at doing different things, and we want kids to be able to explore what they're good at, what they enjoy, and we don't want to make it too complicated. There's already so many distractions that we have in life, and we don't want to bombard them with those distractions. So I think going forward, when we see the different initiatives, there's a lot of private schools that are opening up and offering different options. That we see one in Baldonnel, and it's called Freedom Thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
They're very unique. They actually, out of all the schools that got ranked in the area, they ranked number one
Mm.
for how they were doing in that school and what they were teaching in it. I think it shows that bringing in the creative ways to be able to teach children, and it's amazing that when you look at what they teach, they're teaching children to be entrepreneurs, and they're teaching them the basics, but they're also teaching them how to handle money, how to run a business. Instead of having a janitor, they get the kids to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really highlights a lot of real life skills,
Yeah.
not necessarily making things very complicated. And I think when you teach children that, it shows them that they can think outside the box, not necessarily be trapped in the box.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. And as a homeschool person, I enjoy listening and hearing about how schools are teaching people life skills like how to manage money and also janitorial, because I've had friends growing up who didn't do that, and I feel like moving out and doing university and also now being out here with all my family in Nova
Mm.
Scotia makes it a lot easier to manage myself as a young adult, having those skills and kind of not housework, but things that you don't really think about when you're in a typical public school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of kids that don't even handle money anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and the practicality that goes along with it. It's such a simple thing, but nowadays it can be so complex that there's uh, places where all they take is plastic.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take cash.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then what happens when the internet goes down?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to rely on different things. So I think being able to still have these options to be able to teach children is important. Myself, that when I went to school, I managed to graduate a year early.
Mm-hmm.
But graduating that year early, it wasn't for the fact that I'm super smart.
Mm-hmm.
It was the fact that the direction that I wanted to go in school was my dad was a tradesman, and I wanted to get into the trades. And at the time, there was no partnership programs, and as I got further on into school, the focus was to when you go to university or college. And I wanted to be able to go to college. I wanted to be able to do my trades ticket, and I wanted to be able to have my business that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have different routes that we want to go and pursue things, and being able to do at home schooling as well. I think that's a great option too. Um, it's about finding the right balance for what works best, because every child is different.
Mhm. That's a good way to put it. And kind of moving back a little bit into resources and housing, what's your party's plan for investment in infrastructure in the region?
So the investments into infrastructure is, I can use it as a very simple term that
Mhm.
it's, I've been in here before with Kealy Farm, that through my farm, I do gate to plate. I
Yeah.
sell beef direct to people. And one of the amazing things by doing that is that the slaughterhouse that I use is local.
Mhm.
The money that I spend there stays local.
Mhm.
When I get it slaughtered, I then go to the butcher and I use a local butcher. The money stays local at the butcher.
Mhm.
And then when I end up getting my product back, then I end up selling it to somebody local, and that money stays local.
Yeah.
It's a good example of infrastructure, of what happens when you utilize your core area and not necessarily rely on the globalized system. And when you look at the whole province, the we are definitely relying on the globalized system, that a lot of our products are meant to go out of our country or out of our province. But there are a lot of things that we can do to build our infrastructure, and one of them is that we can promote our forestry system,
Mhm.
and that all of these homes that we need to build, we can make it so then they have to be built with our products.
Mhm.
That money stays at home. It ends up, all the wood that's milled stays at home. It helps incentivize, keep our infrastructure going with the different things that we have. It's the same thing that, with our oil and gas. Right now, we're shipping gas. It's a great thing. A lot of the facilities that we have are here
Mhm.
in our province. We can refine our own gas. We don't necessarily have to ship it all down into not all of our refining happens in British Columbia or Alberta. A lot of it goes down to the US and it comes back.
Yeah.
Um, Depending on how the interaction works across the border, sometimes it's better to do it at home.
Mhm.
All of the jobs that we can promote, um, the growth for our population, that can all happen as we sustainably grow our resource industry.
Mhm.
And I think we can do it in an environmentally friendly way, especially when, using forestry for an example, is that if we were harvesting our wood blocks properly, that the fires wouldn't be able to travel as easily
Mhm.
if we had blocks that were done properly in fire lines. It would make it so then it would stop those fires a lot. Make it so then it's a lot harder for them to travel so far.
Mhm.
But right now we're seeing these fires travel in mass swaths that, there's no easy way to recover,
Mhm.
because it's not done in a natural way, the way it's traveling, especially when it's burning through 6 feet of muskeg, that now it's just clay on the ground.
Yeah.
How's that going to affect our biodiversity going forward? Like, that's not just a little piece of land that it burnt further north from us here.
Mhm.
Um, we also see Fort Nelson. When you look at the industry and infrastructure there, as the gas is coming back, or as the gas, isn't getting shipped and sold as much as it used to be, we're seeing that town shrink bit by bit, and then the railway system not getting maintained is making it so then other projects can start. It's harder for those other projects to start up.
Mhm.
The forestry system has shut down dramatically up there, and what blows my mind is that one thing, when we deal with oil and gas, like, there's only so much. With forestry, it's renewable.
Mhm.
These trees grow back, and we have huge amounts of forests that, if we plant it properly and work with it, it's regenerative.
Mhm.
It is just like farming.
Mhm.
We just need people to look at it holistically as to how we can do it properly. And coming from a farming standpoint, that's how I normally look at things, because we want it to last for future generations. We want to grow our populations. We can't just simply shove everybody into the lower mainland. Those skyscrapers can only go so high.
Yeah.
And no matter what you build down there right now, it's going to be expensive.
Mhm.
And it's how they're going to deal with their low-level worker population, of where they're going to be housed. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But right now, we have the opportunity for growth, and we can easily make that happen. And when we promote that, I think that's where we can start to attract a lot of other things as well, and we can have Fort St. John thrive. and we can have Fort Nelson thrive. We can see the rest of the Peace region do a lot better and attract the professionals that we need to.
All of that sounds wonderful and accurate as well. So, final question, and saved the worst for last or hardest. Are you willing to work across party lines to best represent your constituents?
So I think one of the advantages that the growth that we're seeing right now within our party and what's happened recently with the other party is that we are building a very solid list of candidates.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have a full slate. Um, Going forward, I don't think I ever would have said this back in November when I first became a candidate, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a good chance we can form government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you form government, and you're not opposition or say an independent, you can get into those ministerial roles. You can get into um, writing and building policy. As opposition or an independent, like you're never going to have an independent as a minister. Most of the time, when it comes to committees, it's only if you're invited. Most of the time, you're a backbencher. The scenarios where if they actually have any sort of sway or leeway is limited. So I think going forward, um, I think right now I'm it's looking very good for the Conservatives to be able to get in and form government, and
Mm-hmm.
it even down in the Lower Mainland. And this may sound funny, but my sister lives down in White Rock,
Mm-hmm.
and she's always voted NDP, and she's actually talking about voting Conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, it's not the fact that the morals align with her and the Conservatives. It's the fact that she can't afford to buy a Starbucks anymore
Mm-hmm.
each day. That the affordability and the cost of living has gotten to the point where she can't afford to live in a manner of anywhere even close to what she used to.
Mm-hmm.
And as a single mother, that affects her drastically. And she's really starting to see um, how much of a difference there is between the outlooks of the parties and the
Mm-hmm.
policies that they're bringing forward. So I think we're seeing a pendulum starting to shift. We're seeing it in the polls, and it's not just one poll.
Mm-hmm.
It's dozens of polls. There are projections right now. Even the latest ones are making us look a lot stronger. We have the NDP worried,
Mm-hmm.
and they've got good reason to be worried. And I am very optimistic going forward that um, if we can have somebody in a minister position from Peace River North and Peace River South, that would be amazing for the shift in influence
Mm-hmm.
that we can have, especially for the North. And it's what most people don't think about either is that our leader John Rustad,
Mm-hmm.
he's from the North.
Mm-hmm.
This would be the first premier that I can think of
Mm-hmm.
that's been from the North, that understands the difference in mentality between the mindset of living in the city and then being in rural areas. Whereas a lot of the leaders that we have, they just understand the cities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for too long it's catered that direction. So I think we'll be in a very unique position where we can look at that, so then we can actually see what benefits the North
Mm-hmm.
and what benefits rural BC.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at rural BC, that's 99% of the province,
Yeah.
probably like 99.5% of the province.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we matter. And that's why I got into politics, is because I love living in the North.
Mm-hmm.
I love our lifestyle. I came up here for work
Mm-hmm.
as a tradesman, and the opportunities were here, we're thriving, and there's no reason that we can't be thriving again. And
Mm-hmm.
I honestly believe that if it's done properly, then everybody can thrive. It doesn't just have to be one group.
Wonderful way of putting it. And that was all 7. That was wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.